The galaxy watched the Thalorian Empire unveil a tank that could defy gravity, but no one expected humanity's 70-year-old ground tanks to humiliate it in less than 5 minutes. Station Kepler 7 hung in the void like a massive crystalline flower, its observation decks gleaming under the light of 3 distant suns. Today it hosted the Galactic Military Expo, and let me tell you, Commander Vrek of the Thalorian Empire was absolutely loving every second of it. The guy practically glowed with self-satisfaction, his 4 eyes blinking in that slow, deliberate way that his species did when they thought they were about to drop the mic on the entire galaxy. The exhibition hall stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, packed with delegates from 47 different species, all chittering, buzzing, or whatever passed for excited conversation in their respective languages. Holographic displays floated everywhere, showing off the latest in SHIELD technology, plasma rifles and enough explosive ordnance to make a small star nervous. But none of that mattered right now, because Vrek had the main stage, and oh boy did he know it. Esteemed colleagues, honored guests, and representatives of the lesser, developing military powers. Vrek began, his translator rendering his words into flawless galactic common while somehow preserving that unmistakable tone of condescension. His crimson ceremonial armor caught the light just right, because of course it did. Today, the Thalorian Empire unveils a weapon system that will fundamentally reshape ground warfare as we know it. The lights dimmed dramatically. Somewhere, a Vrelian delegate actually gasped. Vrek's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his kind. A sound like someone shuffling expensive silverware. For generations, ground forces have been limited by a simple, unavoidable problem: gravity. He paused for effect, letting that word hang in the air like a bad smell. Terrain dictates movement, mountains slow advances, rivers become barriers, the ground itself becomes the enemy. Well, my friends, the Thalorian Empire has conquered gravity itself. The floor beneath the stage split open with a pneumatic hiss that was probably more theatrical than necessary, and up rose the most absurdly impressive piece of military hardware most of the audience had ever seen: the anti-gravity assault platform, what Vrek insisted on calling the Sovereign-class battle tank, even though it did not touch the ground and therefore made the word tank somewhat questionable, floated there like a metallic predator. Smooth, angular surfaces reflected the station's lights in hypnotic patterns. Weapon ports lined its flanks like the eyes of some deep space creature, and it hovered, perfectly still, about 3 meters off the ground, held up by absolutely nothing visible to the naked eye. The crowd erupted. The Mantilian defense minister clicked his chelicere so rapidly it sounded like applause. A group of Paraxian generals practically fell over themselves trying to get closer to the stage. Even the usually stoic Kravathi observer leaned forward in his seat, photoreceptors dilating with interest. Vrek soaked it in like a plant drinking sunlight. Zero ground pressure, unlimited terrain traversal, vertical mobility up to 800 meters, and he extended one of his upper manipulator arms toward the platform with a flourish that would have made a stage magician jealous. Enough firepower to level a fortified position from angles that conventional ground forces cannot even dream of reaching. More cheering, more scrambling to record every angle of the magnificent floating death machine. Vrek's subordinates stood at attention nearby, their own armor polished to a mirror shine, looking like they had personally invented anti-gravity just this morning. But then, because the universe has a sense of humor, someone in the back of the hall actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a nervous titter, but an actual genuine laugh, the kind that suggested someone found something legitimately funny. The crowd went quiet faster than a hyperdrive cutting out mid-jump. Vrek's eyes all swiveled toward the source of the sound, which frankly was pretty creepy to watch. There, leaning against one of the support columns with her arms crossed and a grin that could cut durasteel, stood Colonel Janet Pierce of the Terran Defense Forces. Humans, for those unfamiliar, looked like someone had taken the basic bipedal template and decided to make it as boringly average as possible. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. Not even any interesting coloration. Janet Pierce had dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested she could not be bothered with fashion, sharp green eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and the kind of casual posture that came from being utterly, completely unimpressed. "Something amusing, Colonel?" Vrek asked, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that important people got when their moment was being interrupted. Janet pushed off from the column and walked forward, boots clicking on the polished floor, each step echoing in the sudden silence. She stopped right at the edge of the crowd, still grinning. "Oh, nothing, Commander. Please continue. I am absolutely fascinated by your floating tank. Truly revolutionary stuff." The way she said revolutionary made it sound like she was describing a particularly clever hat trick. Vrek's mandibles clicked together again, but this time it sounded less like expensive silverware, and more like someone cracking their knuckles before a fight. Vrek decided to take the high road, which in his case meant the condescending road, the patronizing road, the road that suggested he was explaining quantum mechanics to a particularly slow child. He gestured toward the floating platform with two of his arms while the other two clasped behind his back in a pose that screamed military superiority. Perhaps, Colonel Pierce, you are unfamiliar with the principles involved. Allow me to educate you. Oh, he was really leaning into this now. The Sovereign class utilizes a network of graviton field manipulators powered by a microfusion core that generates 0.7 terawatts of sustained output. The field itself creates a localized distortion in space-time, effectively neutralizing the gravitational pull of any planetary body with a mass less than 3 times standard. A Zelnari engineer near the front actually pulled out a datapad and started taking notes. The Mantillian defense minister nodded sagely, as if he had understood a single word of that technobabble. Vrek was on a roll now, warming to his subject like a professor who had finally found someone to lecture at. The armor plating consists of magnetically aligned durasteel composite, capable of deflecting plasma bolts up to Class 9 intensity. The primary cannon, he pointed to the largest weapon port, delivers a focused particle beam with an effective range of 12 kilometers, and the entire system can be deployed, combat-ready in under 90 seconds. Remarkable, murmured the Kravathi observer, his translator making it sound like a prayer. Truly, a masterwork of engineering, added the Paraxian general, all three of his heads bobbing in agreement with each other. Vrek's posture shifted into something even more self-satisfied, which honestly seemed physically impossible until you watched him do it. Now, I understand that humanity has recently begun exporting their ground vehicles to some of the frontier worlds. Tracked vehicles, if I recall correctly, he said. Tracked the way someone might say plague-ridden or radioactive. Tell me, Colonel, how exactly does your species plan to compete with technology that literally defies the laws of physics that have constrained warfare since the dawn of civilization? A few delegates actually chuckled at that. The Zelnari engineer looked up from his notes, antennae twitching with what might have been amusement. Even some of the more diplomatic species allowed themselves knowing glances at each other, the kind that said, well, humans tried their best, did they not? Janet Pierce, for her part, simply smiled wider. She rocked back on her heels, hands sliding into her pockets in a gesture so casual it bordered on disrespectful given the formal nature of the event. Oh, you know, as humans, we like to keep things simple. Wheels, treads, the occasional combustion engine. Very retro. Very primitive. Indeed, Vrek agreed, completely missing the tone in her voice. I have seen the specifications for your M743 main battle tank. 63 tons of metal that requires solid ground beneath it to function. Top speed of perhaps 70 kilometers per hour on ideal terrain. It must climb over obstacles rather than simply floating above them. And this is your frontline combat vehicle. That is the one, Janet confirmed, nodding along like she was discussing the weather. Then permit me to extend an invitation, Vrek announced, his voice rising so that every delegate in the hall could hear clearly. Tomorrow, on the testing grounds of Kepler-7's fourth moon, the Thalorian Empire will demonstrate the full capabilities of our anti-gravity assault platforms, and we invite the Terran Defense Forces to bring whatever equipment they deem appropriate. Let us see in practical application how your primitive tracked vehicles compare to technology that has transcended the limitations of conventional warfare. The hall buzzed with excitement. This was not just a demonstration anymore. This was a challenge. This was drama. The Mantillian defense minister clicked his chelicere so fast it sounded like maracas. The Piraxians were already placing bets among themselves, all three heads arguing about the odds. Janet Pierce looked around at the crowd, at the floating tank that somehow managed to look smug despite being an inanimate object, at Commander Vrek, whose 4 eyes practically glowed with anticipated victory. She pulled one hand from her pocket and examined her fingernails with exaggerated interest. Well, Commander, that sounds absolutely delightful. We will bring some equipment. Nothing fancy, you understand, just some old hardware we have lying around. She looked up, meeting all 4 of his eyes with her too. Should be educational for everyone involved. The way she said educational made Vrek's mandibles stop clicking. Just for a second. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a supernova, at least as far as the assembled delegates were concerned. Kepler-7's fourth moon, designated testing ground Sigma, was a barren ball of rock and regret. The kind of place where atmosphere was optional and the landscape looked like someone had given up halfway through creating it. Perfect for military demonstrations, terrible for literally everything else. The observation platforms floated at a safe distance, packed with every dignitary, general and military analyst who could beg, borrow, or bribe their way onto the guest list. Holographic displays showed multiple angles of the testing grounds below. A 50-kilometer stretch of absolutely miserable terrain featuring canyons, boulder fields, and the kind of jagged rock formations that made you wonder what the moon had done to deserve this. Vrek stood at the central platform, resplendent in his combat armor, surrounded by a dozen Sovereign-class platforms that hovered in perfect formation like metallic birds of prey. The morning light, such as it was filtering through the thin atmosphere, made them gleam with menacing beauty. He looked like a commander about to win a war before breakfast. And then the human transport arrived. It came in on a standard cargo hauler, the kind of ship you would use to deliver mining equipment or emergency rations. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive. The thing looked like it had been in service since humans first figured out how to make metal float through space on purpose. It descended toward the staging area with all the grace of a falling brick, retro thrusters firing in stuttering bursts that suggested the pilot was either very new at this or the ship was very old at existing. The rear loading ramp dropped open with a hydraulic whine that echoed across the observation platforms and outrolled humanity's contribution to modern warfare. Tanks. Actual honest-to-physics, sitting on the ground because gravity exists tanks. The laughter started immediately. The Zelnari engineer actually had to steady himself against a railing. The Mantilian defense minister's Chilisare clicking reached a pitch that probably annoyed every species with decent hearing within 100 meters. Even the normally reserved Cravathi observer made a sound that his translator rendered as stifled amusement, which was basically the Cravathi equivalent of losing their minds laughing. Oh my, wheezed a Piraxian general, all three heads struggling to maintain composure. They actually brought tracked vehicles. They genuinely brought tracked vehicles to compete with anti-gravity technology. The human tanks rolled down the ramp one after another, treads clanking against metal, engines rumbling with that distinctive low growl that came from actual combustion happening inside actual cylinders. There were 6 of them, painted in a dull gray-green that managed to look boring even by military standards. Boxy turrets sat atop even boxier hulls. They had antennas sticking up at odd angles. Spare equipment hung off their sides in what could only be described as organized clutter. They looked like something a museum would display under a sign reading warfare. Early interstellar period before species figured out better options. Vrek's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh out loud, because commanders did not laugh at their opponents before crushing them. That would be unseemly, but oh, he wanted to. You could see it in the way his eyes kept moving between the floating Thalorian platforms and the human tanks that sat on their treads like tired animals. Colonel Pierce, he called out across the observation platform, his voice carrying that special blend of false courtesy and genuine mockery. I must confess, I expected, perhaps, that humanity might have developed something new for this demonstration. Some attempt at innovation. Instead, you bring us museum pieces. Janet Pierce stood apart from the main crowd, arms still crossed, watching her tanks maneuver into position below. 6 vehicles spreading out across the staging area, their commanders visible in the open hatches, looking for all the galaxy like they were about to take part in a historical reenactment rather than a military demonstration. Oh, these are not museum pieces, Commander, Janet replied, not even looking at Vrek. Her eyes stayed locked on the tanks below. These are fresh off the assembly line. Brand new. Well, the design is 70 years old, give or take, but we keep building them because she paused, and that smile crept back onto her face. They work. This got more laughter. The idea that anyone would keep building 70-year-old technology when anti-gravity existed was apparently the funniest thing the assembled military minds had heard all year. One of the Piraxian generals, the middle head, managed to compose himself enough to speak. But surely, Colonel, you must see the disadvantage. Commander Vrek's platforms can float above any obstacle. Your vehicles must navigate around or over terrain feature. His weapons can fire from elevated positions. Yours are limited to ground-level targeting. The speed difference alone makes this demonstration almost unfair. Almost unfair, Janet repeated as if tasting the words. Yeah, almost. Vrek spread all 4 arms in a magnanimous gesture. Perhaps we should establish some ground rules, so to speak, to make this more sporting. We would not want this to become, well, embarrassing for the Terran Defense Forces. Oh, do not worry about us, Commander, Janet said. And there was something in her voice now, something that cut through the laughter like a knife through silk. We have been embarrassing ourselves in front of superior technology for our entire history. We are really good at it by now. The way she said it made exactly one person in the crowd stop laughing. Vrek. Just for a second. The testing ground stretched out like a nightmare someone had designed specifically to make military planners cry. Kepler-7's fourth moon did not believe in gentle slopes or convenient flat areas. Instead, it offered a greatest hits collection of terrible terrain. Canyons that dropped 30 meters straight down, boulder fields where rocks the size of small buildings sat around like they owned the place, ridgelines so sharp they could probably cut through armor plating if you looked at them wrong, and a scattering of impact craters from some ancient meteor shower that had apparently used this moon for target practice. The observation platforms hummed with anticipation, holographic displays flickering to life and showing multiple camera angles of the course below. Someone, probably one of Rek's people, had gone to the trouble of highlighting the most difficult sections with helpful annotations like extreme gradient, impassable to conventional vehicles, and my personal favorite, certain death for wheeled or tracked systems. Rek stood at the central platform's command console, one hand resting on the controls with the casual confidence of someone who already knew how the story ended. Esteemed observers, the demonstration course covers 50 kilometers of what our geological surveys rate as Class 4 hostile terrain. We will conduct 3 evaluation segments: mobility trials, weapons accuracy testing, and combined tactical maneuvers. He paused, letting his translator catch up. The Thalorian Empire shall proceed first. He did not say to show you how it is done, but honestly he might as well have. A signal pulsed across the command frequency, and the 12 Sovereign-class platforms responded like dancers hearing music. They rose as one, climbing smoothly to an altitude of 50 meters, their anti-gravity fields leaving absolutely no trace on the ground below. No dust kicked up, no displaced rocks, nothing. They simply defied physics and made it look easy. Mobility trial, segment 1, Rek announced, his voice carrying the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for people who had just won extremely unfair bets. Maximum speed traverse across uneven terrain. The platforms shot forward like they had somewhere important to be and were already late. The speedometers on the holographic displays climbed rapidly, 100 kilometers per hour, 150, 200, 220. They screamed across the boulder field without slowing down, because why would they need to slow down when boulders were a ground-level problem and they were emphatically not on the ground? The lead platform hit 240 as it crossed a canyon that would have stopped any conventional vehicle dead, literally sailing over a 30-meter gap like it was a minor inconvenience. The Mantillian defense minister's Chilicere clicking reached a fever pitch. Several delegates applauded. The Zelmari engineer was furiously updating his calculations, muttering numbers that probably added up to "this is impossible." And yet here we are. Rek let the moment breathe before continuing. Altitude demonstration. The platforms broke formation and began climbing, up and up and up, rising like helium balloons if helium balloons were covered in weapons and looked like they could end civilizations. 50 meters became 100, then 200. Then 500. The displays tracked them as they reached the mission-specified maximum of 800 meters, where they hovered in a perfect grid pattern, so high above the moon's surface that terrain had become a theoretical concept rather than an actual problem. From this altitude, Rek explained, and you could hear the smile in his voice even through the translator, our platforms maintain complete tactical superiority. Enemy ground forces cannot reach us. Their weapons cannot achieve effective targeting. Meanwhile, our sensors provide unobstructed views of the entire battlefield, and our weapons retain full effectiveness. To demonstrate this last point, the platforms opened fire. Particle beams lanced down from 800 meters up, striking targeting markers that someone had helpfully placed around the course. Each beam hit within centimeters of its designated target, vaporizing rock and creating small mushroom clouds of superheated debris that glowed briefly before cooling in the thin atmosphere. The accuracy was, frankly, terrifying, the kind of accuracy that made you reconsider any career choices that might involve being on the receiving end of those beams. The platforms descended and moved into the next phase, demonstrating their ability to navigate vertical surfaces. One platform dropped into a canyon, maneuvered through the narrow space between walls, then simply rose straight up the sheer cliff face like gravity was a suggestion it had chosen to ignore. Another approached a ridgeline at speed, rotated 90 degrees without slowing, and slipped through a gap between rocks that would have required conventional vehicles to find another route or possibly give up and go home. Combined tactical maneuver, Rek announced, clearly saving the best for last. Simulated assault on a fortified position. The 12 platforms split into 3 groups, executing a flanking maneuver that would have made military academy instructors weep with joy. Group 1 provided suppressing fire from altitude. Group 2 swept in low and fast from the left, weapons hammering targeting markers that represented enemy emplacements. Group 3 came in from the right at medium altitude, their particle beams creating a crossfire that left absolutely nowhere for a theoretical defender to hide. The whole thing took 90 seconds and looked like a ballet performed by very angry, very well-armed machine. When it finished, the observation platforms erupted in applause. Even species that did not traditionally show emotion were nodding their various heads, appendages, or sensory organs in approval. The Paraxian generals were already arguing about procurement contracts. All 9 heads talking at once. Vrek turned toward where Janet Pierce stood, arms still crossed, face still wearing that mysterious smile. "Colonel Pierce, the course is yours. Please demonstrate what 70-year-old tracked vehicle technology can accomplish against such challenges." The holographic displays shifted focus to the human staging area, where 6 very ordinary, very ground-based tanks sat waiting, their engines rumbling like patient predators. Janet pushed off from the railing and keyed her comm unit. "All right, Sergeant Kowalski, they are all done showing off. Let us go to work." The way she said work made Vrek's mandibles stop clicking. Again, the 6 human tanks rolled forward with all the enthusiasm of machinery that had done this 1,000 times before and would probably do it 1,000 times more. Their treads churned against the rocky surface, kicking up small clouds of dust that settled slowly in the low gravity. They moved at what could charitably be called a leisurely pace, maybe 40 kilometers per hour, which compared to the Thalorian platform's 200 plus looked like watching moss grow in real time. The first tank reached the boulder field and predictably slowed down even more. It carefully navigated around a large rock formation, treads adjusting to the uneven ground with mechanical precision that was technically impressive but also painfully obviously limited by the fact that it could not, just float over the problem. The Mantilian defense minister's Chilasuri made a sound that the translator interpreted as bemused pity. One of the Paraxian generals, the left head, muttered something about participation trophies. "Well," Vrek said, leaning back with all 4 arms crossed in a pose that screamed, "I told you so," without actually saying it. "I suppose we must respect the effort, even if the results are, shall we say, predetermined by physical limitations." The second human tank approached the same boulder field from a different angle, and this one did something slightly different. It stopped, just sat there, engine idling, turret rotating slowly like it was taking in the scenery. "Is it broken?" asked the Zelnari engineer, antennae drooping with second-hand embarrassment. Then the tank flickered. Not disappeared, not vanished, just flickered, like someone had adjusted the contrast on reality itself. The dull gray-green paint seemed to shift, seemed to flow, and suddenly the tank was not gray-green anymore. It was rock-colored, boulder-colored, the exact same shade and texture as the terrain around it, down to the shadowing and the fine details that made you question whether you were looking at a tank or just another piece of the landscape that happened to be tank-shaped. "What?" said the Cravathi observer, which was about as eloquent as anyone else was managing. The third tank entered the boulder field and it flickered too. Then the fourth. Within 30 seconds all 6 human tanks had effectively become very large, very mobile, very armed rocks that happened to have treads. "Adaptive camouflage," Janet Pierce said calmly, like she was discussing the weather rather than technology that was making half the observation deck recalculate their assumptions. "Photoreactive hull coating. Analyzes surrounding terrain and adjusts pigmentation accordingly. Not invisible obviously, but close enough when you are not moving much." "But," Vrek's mandibles clicked uncertainly, "such technology would require enormous processing power and energy consumption. The coating alone would add significant weight to the vehicle, and the maintenance requirements are manageable," Janet interrupted, still smiling. "Sergeant Kowalski, if you would be so kind." The lead human tank, now looking like a particularly aggressive boulder, pivoted its turret toward one of the Thalorian platforms that was hovering about 200 meters away in observation mode, not participating in the demonstration but just floating there looking superior. The tank's main gun did not fire. Instead, every antenna on its hull lit up with activity, and suddenly the Thalorian platform lurched sideways like someone had slapped it. Its smooth hovering became jerky, uncertain. The anti-gravity field flickered, and the platform dropped 5 meters before catching itself, stabilizing at a much lower altitude than before. "Electronic warfare suite," Janet explained as if this was perfectly normal. "Your graviton field manipulators emit a very specific frequency signature when operating. Our systems identified it about 30 seconds after you started your demonstration yesterday. Took us maybe an hour to develop a jamming protocol. Not enough to completely disable your platforms, that would be rude, but enough to make them significantly less stable and significantly more targetable." The observation deck went very, very quiet. Vrek's 4 eyes widened. "You cannot." That is not. The shielding alone should prevent any external interference with our graviton matrices. Should, Janet agreed pleasantly. Funny word that. Should. The human tanks began moving again, and this time they moved with purpose. The adaptive camouflage flickered on and off as they maneuvered, becoming visible when they needed to move quickly, disappearing into the landscape when they stopped. They did not try to match the Thalorian platforms for speed because they did not need to. Instead, they used the terrain, positioning themselves in gullies, behind ridgelines, in places where the hovering platforms would have to expose themselves to get clear firing solutions. Weapons test, Janet said softly into her comm. The lead tank fired. Not a particle beam. Not a plasma bolt. Just a good old-fashioned high-explosive anti-tank round that left the barrel at 1800 meters per second with a crack that echoed across the moon's surface. The round climbed, arced, and struck a targeting marker at 9 kilometers with enough force to create a crater you could park a small shuttle in. Kinetic penetrators, Janet said, as the other tanks opened fire in sequence, each round hitting targets at varying ranges with mechanical precision. Cheaper than energy weapons, no power drain, and the terminal ballistics are quite impressive. Plus, they work just fine in atmosphere, vacuum, or anything in between. One of the tanks rotated its turret toward a Thalorian platform that was hovering at medium altitude, and the platform's pilots apparently decided that discretion was the better part of not being shot at, because it climbed rapidly to a safer height. Your targeting systems, Vex said, and his voice had lost all of its earlier confidence, replaced by something that sounded uncomfortably like concern. How are you achieving those accuracy rates at such ranges? Tactical AI, Janet replied. Integrated fire control that links all 6 tanks into a single coordinated network. They share targeting data, environmental analysis, threat assessment. What one tank sees, they all see. Where one tank can shoot, they can all coordinate fire. She paused, watching the displays as her tanks continued their demonstration, moving through the course with practiced efficiency that came from actual combat doctrine rather than impressive-looking maneuvers. Also, our crews train for about 18 months before they are considered combat ready. Turns out having humans in the loop, making decisions, adapting to changing situations, that is still pretty valuable, even with all the fancy automation. The tanks reached the canyon section, the one that the Thalorian platforms had simply floated over. The human tanks did not float. Instead, the lead tank stopped at the edge, extended what looked like a bridge from its rear deck, anchored it to the canyon rim, and the following tanks rolled across one by one, treads gripping the metal surface with absolute confidence. The last tank across retracted the bridge, and they continued on their way like this was just another Tuesday. But the speed, one of the Piraxian generals protested weakly. Your platforms are so much slower than the Thalorian systems. True, Janet acknowledged. But here is the thing about speed. It only matters if you need to be somewhere fast. Our doctrine is not about racing around the battlefield looking impressive. It is about controlling ground, denying areas to the enemy, and being exactly where we need to be when we need to be there. And then, when someone shows up in their fancy floating tank, she smiled wider. We are already dug in, already targeting them, already coordinating fires, and their wonderful speed just means they get to the kill zone faster. She turned to face Rick directly, and the smile was gone now, replaced by something harder, something that had seen actual combat rather than demonstration courses. Your platforms are engineering marvels, Commander. Genuinely impressive. But they are also flying targets that broadcast their position, require constant power to stay airborne, and have crews that have probably never had to fight something they could not just float away from. On the displays, the human tanks had taken up positions in a defensive formation that overlapped fields of fire, created mutual support positions, and turned a random section of moon into a kill zone that nothing short of orbital bombardment was getting through without paying a terrible price. Our tanks are old technology, Janet continued. Primitive, even. But they are old because they work. They are primitive because sometimes Commander simple is better than clever, and they keep getting built because 70 years of combat data says that when you need to take ground, hold ground, and make the other guy regret every life choice that led him to your piece of ground, treads and armor and a big gun operated by well-trained humans still gets the job done. Vex stared at the displays, watching his magnificent floating platforms maintain a very careful distance from the human tanks, which sat there like patient hunters waiting for something foolish enough to come within range. His mandibles clicked once, very quietly, and for the first time all day it did not sound smug at all. It sounded like someone doing very rapid recalculations about the nature of military superiority and coming up with answers he did not particularly like. Janet Pierce pulled her hands from her pockets and stretched. So, Commander, Shall we discuss procurement contracts, or would you like to see what happens when we bring out the artillery support? The observation deck remained very quiet. Somewhere in the back, someone dropped a datapad and the clatter echoed like thunder.